Don't worry. Okay, so the life of Frederick Douglass. PBAs, or performance-based assessment, and performance tasks. Okay, so our first slide, these are our directions. It says, use the document to address the following questions. The following question. Driving historical question. Why is Frederick Douglass important? Now remember, your driving historical question and task. Task is just a fancy way to say this is what you're going to do. Your directions are your task. So we are going to use this document, this comic, to address, which means answer, this question. Why is Frederick Douglass important? So I know it's hard to read, so I'm going to read it as well. It says, inspired by Garrison and his fellow abolitionists, I began to speak out publicly, not just against the evils of slavery, but at the preposterous notion that slaves should be set free and returned to Africa. As to this notion of colonization, that the emancipated slave should be sent back to Africa, I say this: I am American. I know little of Africa, for it is not my home. I do not know its languages. My sweat and blood and tears are not soaked into the earth of Africa. America is my home. I am the product of the greatest sin, and I will not leave my home simply to appease the guilty conscience of a nation. We will not be cast aside, placed on boats, and shipped off like unwanted rubbish. We are human beings as slaves. As slaves, we built this nation. By force, we will not, as free men and women, be made to leave that which we have built. So this is the document we're going to be using to answer the question, why is Frederick Douglass important? So the driving historical question, why is Frederick Douglass important? Take about 3 minutes to answer the driving historical question. It must be in a full sentence. Your answer to the driving historical question is also called your claim. Remember, when answering your question, you use the key words in the answer. Rephrase the question in your answer/claim. There should be a text box, but if not, you can go up, add your text box here, and type in there. I am going to give you 5 minutes to write a claim. So now that we have a claim, so we have to expand on it. Expanding on your claim. After you have read the driving historical question, you answer it with your claim, but your claim must have facts to back it up. So in this PBA, they give us a claim they want us to use. The driving historical question again is, why is Frederick Douglass important? Claim. Frederick Douglass was a former slave who became a powerful voice for human rights. So from now on, this is going to be the claim we're talking about. Frederick Douglass was a former slave who became a powerful voice for human rights. In the next slides, we're going to find evidence in our document, the picture or the comic, and explain how that evidence helps us to answer the driving historical question. When we explain how our evidence answers the question, it is called reasoning. Your reasoning explains your evidence and how it answers the question and supports your claim. Okay, so evidence and reasoning number 1. So, from the first panel, I took this part. It says, inspired by Garrison and his fellow abolitionists, I began to speak out publicly, not just against the evils of slavery, but at the preposterous notion that slaves should be set free and returned to Africa. So, our evidence is Frederick Douglass says, I began to speak out publicly, not just against the evils of slavery, etc. In your response, take 5 minutes to explain why the quote above, your evidence, supports your claim. And remember, our claim is Frederick Douglass was a former slave who became a powerful voice for human rights. How does it when he says, I began to speak out publicly, not just against the evils of slavery? So you're going to explain how this quote answers the question, why was Frederick Douglass important? So you should have something. Start your sentence like, where's my comment? Frederick Douglass in the comic says, I began to speak out publicly, not just against the evils of slavery. And this proves he was a powerful voice because ... And if your internet is struggling, I sympathize. Just listen along and you'll have to do it when you're able to get the documents open. Okay, so we're going to move on to the next piece of evidence. Number 2, evidence and reasoning. So I pulled this from another panel. America is my home. I am a product of its greatest sin, and I will not leave my home simply to appease the guilty conscience of a nation. Our evidence comes directly from the document. On a PBA answer sheet, you should quote text you are pulling directly from the document or clearly state what is shown in the picture. For example, Frederick Douglass says in the document, America is my home. I am the product of its greatest sin, and I will not leave my home. In your response, take 5 minutes to explain why the quote above supports your claim, the answer to the question. Remember, our claim is Frederick Douglass was a former slave who became a powerful voice for human rights. So, your evidence is America is my home. I am a product of its greatest sin. In your response, take about 5 minutes to explain why the quote above, which is your evidence, supports your claim, which is Frederick Douglass was a former slave who became a powerful voice for human rights. I'm going to give y'all 5 minutes for that. Okay, so now we are on to evidence and reasoning number 3. Remember, our evidence comes directly from the document. You should quote text you are pulling directly from the document exactly or clearly state what is shown in the picture. Our quote this time is, Frederick Douglass says, "We are human beings as slaves. We will not, as free men and women, be made to leave." In your response, take 5 minutes to explain why the quote above, which this quote is your evidence, supports your claim. Remember, the claim is Frederick Douglass was a former slave who became a powerful voice for human rights. So now we're going to complete our PBA, which is simply going to be compiling everything we just did. So on your answer sheet, which is this blank page right here, you're going to put the driving historical question, your claim, your 3 pieces of evidence right here, and your 3 reasonings. 1, 2, 3. If you did them right, you should just be able to copy and paste them onto your blank answer sheet. So really, you're just filling in your answer sheet with the information we did, copying and pasting everything here. So make sure your reasoning restates the question and explains the quote. Reasoning explains the evidence that supports your claim. Now, once you've got your answer sheet filled out, you can hit submit and spend the last 25 minutes working on makeup work independently. But do not exit out without finishing this and submitting.